The voicemail was 43 seconds long, and it started with her laughing. Not a nervous laugh, not a polite one. The real one, the deep one that comes from somewhere genuine. I'd know that laugh anywhere. I've been in love with that laugh for 3 years. I was standing in the parking lot of Station 7 on Sutro Street, still in my gear, 14-hour shift just ended, phone to my ear listening to what I thought was going to be a message from my fiancée saying she was running late for dinner or asking me to pick something up on the way home. Instead, I got 43 seconds of a conversation she didn't know she was recording. Her voice. A man's voice. Words I'm not going to write out in full, but that I understood completely and immediately in the way your whole body understands something before your brain has caught up to it. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after it ended. Then I listened to it again. Then I drove home. My name is Cole. I'm 34. I'm a firefighter, have been for 9 years, work out of a station on the northwest side of Reno, Nevada. It's a job that does things to your sense of time and proportion. You go from absolute nothing to the worst possible situation in about 90 seconds, and then you go back to nothing. And you do that on rotation for years until your body and brain develop a kind of internal triage system, a way of sorting what's actually an emergency from what just feels like one. I tell you this because it's relevant. I thought I had a pretty good sense of when something was actually wrong. I thought I knew the difference between a real alarm and a false one. I was wrong about that. Her name is Amber. She's 31. Works as a physical therapist at a rehab clinic on South Virginia Street. We met in 2021 at a climbing gym on Main Avenue. She was there with a couple of coworkers. I was there with my buddy Reese. And we ended up on adjacent routes, and she made a comment about my footwork that was technically critical and completely correct, which told me everything I needed to know about her in about 15 seconds. She doesn't soften things unnecessarily. She sees what's there, and she names it. I found that quality immediately attractive because I grew up in a family where nothing was ever said directly, and I'd spent most of my adult life trying to get away from that. We dated for 8 months, moved in together in the fall of 2022 into a 2-bedroom house near Idlewild Park, red brick, covered front porch, a backyard with a big juniper tree that drops needles everywhere, but that we both agreed to tolerate because it gave the yard a specific kind of smell in the evening that was worth the cleanup. The neighborhood is quiet in the way Reno neighborhoods can be, a couple of blocks from the river, the kind of place where people walk dogs at 7 in the morning and wave at you from their driveways. Life was good, genuinely good. Amber was building her client base at the clinic, I was moving up at the station, and we had the kind of routine that doesn't sound interesting from the outside, but feels exactly right from the inside. Sunday morning farmers market on Evans Avenue, her cooking during the week when my shifts allowed, me taking weekends when I was off, hiking up in the Virginia range when the weather was right, a standing Friday night dinner at a place on California Avenue that we'd been going to since our second month together. Small, steady life. I liked it. I thought she liked it too. I proposed in December of last year on the back porch of that house, just the two of us, which is how she'd said she wanted it if it ever happened. No performance, no audience, just a real moment between two people. I bought the ring from a jeweler on South Center Street, and I got down on one knee in the cold in our backyard with the juniper tree behind me dropping needles on my shoulder, and she said yes immediately, before I'd finished the sentence, which made me laugh and made me more certain than I'd already been. We set a date for late April. 3 months out. We'd sent the invitations, booked the venue, chosen the food. Her dress was in a garment bag in the closet in the spare room, and I'd been explicitly forbidden from looking at it, which I hadn't because I genuinely didn't want to. I wanted to be surprised. My flaw? And I've thought about this constantly in the weeks since everything happened, trying to figure out what I contributed to whatever distance opened up between us, is that I get emotionally unavailable after bad calls. In the job, that means fires where things go wrong, medical calls that don't end well, the ones that follow you home. I'd had a bad stretch in the fall, a house fire in October, a car accident in November that I won't describe in detail, and I'd gone quiet in the way I go quiet, closed off, not present in the full sense. I told Amber I was processing and she'd been patient about it, but patient has a duration, and I think I pushed past it more than I realized. I'm not saying what she did was because of that. I'm saying there was a gap, and something moved into it. The first thing I noticed was in January. Amber had a coworker named Brandon who she'd mentioned a few times over the past year in the context of work. He was a PT assistant at the same clinic, had been there about 18 months, apparently well-liked, good with the patients. I had no picture of him. He was just a name that appeared occasionally in the same way co-workers' names appear, without weight. In January, she mentioned him a few more times, always in context. Brandon had handled a tricky intake. Brandon had suggested a technique for a shoulder patient that Amber found interesting. Brandon this, Brandon that. Normal work conversation. I nodded and responded and thought nothing of it. What I noticed, and immediately rationalized, was that she started going into work earlier on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She'd always been someone who liked a slow morning, coffee, and quiet time before leaving, and the sudden shift to out the door by 7 was noticeable. She said the clinic had restructured the early appointment schedule and they needed more coverage. Plausible. True for all I knew. Then in February, I noticed her phone behavior changed. She'd always been relaxed about her phone around me. Left it on the kitchen counter, didn't pay it unusual attention, would often leave it in another room for hours without anxiety. In February, she started keeping it on her. Not in a theatrical way, not the obvious stuff you see in movies where someone clutches their device to their chest. More like it was just always in a pocket or face down on whatever surface was closest to her. The casual carelessness about it was gone. I noticed the change the way you notice a sound that stops. Not because anything alarming happened, but because something familiar had gone quiet. I said nothing. I filed it under. She's probably getting more work messages and doesn't want to seem rude checking her phone constantly. That's the story I told myself, and I told it convincingly enough to keep me quiet for about 6 weeks. There was one evening in February that I replay sometimes. We were on the couch, her legs across my lap, watching something on TV, and her phone buzzed, and she picked it up and looked at it, and her expression did something. Not dramatic, just a small, fast thing, like a room changing temperature. Gone in a second. She put the phone back down and didn't say anything and kept watching TV, and I almost asked, and then the moment passed, and I let it go. I should have asked. I know that. But we were comfortable, and the show was on, and I was tired from a 48-hour rotation, and I chose the path of least resistance, which is what you do when you don't want to learn something you're afraid to know. March is when the doubt became something I could no longer comfortably background. It started with a conversation that shouldn't have bothered me as much as it did. We were at dinner, just the two of us, the Friday place on California Avenue, and I asked her about her week, and she gave me the summary: patient load, an intake that had been more complicated than expected, the usual administrative friction. And then she mentioned Brandon in passing, something about a schedule change, and I watched her face while she said his name. Nothing dramatic. Nothing a person watching from the outside would have caught. Just something in the quality of the neutral she was performing that wasn't quite right. Neutral has a texture when it's genuine. This was a slightly different texture. I didn't say anything at dinner. In the car on the way home, I thought about all the small things that had accumulated since January. The early mornings. The phone. The moment on the couch. The way Brandon's name had been appearing with a regularity that I'd been treating as coincidental, but that now, laid out in sequence, felt less so. I thought about saying something right then, in the car. I looked at her profile in the passenger seat. She was looking out the window, hand on the door, the Reno lights sliding past, and I thought, what do I actually have? A feeling and a name and some changed habits. That's not evidence. That's just anxiety telling a story. So I said nothing. I drove home, and we went to sleep, and I lay there in the dark next to her doing the thing you're not supposed to do, which is build a case out of circumstantial material, and then argue against it, and then build it again. I've run into burning buildings that scared me less than that month of March. The mundane center of it, the moment that captures what that period actually felt like, was a Tuesday in the middle of the month. I was off that day. I'd done laundry, cleaned the bathroom, made lunch, gone for a run down by the river. A completely ordinary day, the kind I usually find restorative. But the whole time I had this low-frequency hum going on underneath everything. This awareness that I was waiting for something I couldn't name, and the ordinariness of the day made it worse somehow. I was folding laundry on the bed at 3 in the afternoon, putting Amber's shirts in her drawer the way I always did, and I thought, I'm folding her clothes and I don't know if anything is real right now. That was the sentence in my head. Just that. And then I finished folding and put the laundry away and made dinner. I went back and forth on whether to say something directly every day for 3 weeks. Every day I talked myself out of it for the same reason. I had nothing concrete. And I knew, from the job, from years of reading situations under pressure, that acting on suspicion alone without anything solid behind it could do damage that was hard to undo. I didn't want to accuse her of something she wasn't doing. I didn't want to be that person. I told myself to wait. If something was there, something would surface. Something surfaced. It was a Sunday evening in late March, 10 days before I'm writing this. I'd worked a 48 and came home Sunday afternoon, slept for a few hours, woke up groggy around 7. Amber was out. She'd said she was visiting her friend Carla, which was normal. They got together most Sundays. I made coffee, sat on the porch for a while, and then went inside and checked my phone. I had a voicemail notification from earlier that day, flagged as coming from Amber's number. I assumed she'd called while I was sleeping. She did that sometimes when she didn't want to wake me. Left a message instead of coming to find me in the bedroom. I pressed play. The first sound was her laugh. The real one. Then a man's voice. Low, close, unhurried in the way voices are when the person using them feels safe. Then her voice again. And what followed was 43 seconds of a conversation she had no idea was being recorded because she'd somehow initiated a voicemail call to my number while her phone was in her pocket or her bag, the microphone picking up everything with a terrible fidelity. I won't transcribe it. I'll say that there was no ambiguity in what I heard. None. The tone, the words, the comfortable intimacy of two people in the middle of something. It was all there in 43 seconds. And at the very end, just before the recording cut off, I heard her say his name. Brandon. Just once, conversationally, the way you say someone's name when you're completely at ease with them. That was the last thing on the recording. I stood in the parking lot of the station. I'd driven there without fully thinking about why, just needed to be somewhere that wasn't the house, and I listened to it twice. Then I sat in my truck for probably 40 minutes. I've sat with some bad things in my life. Some genuinely terrible things, in this job. This was different. This wasn't happening to someone else, and I wasn't there to help. This was happening inside the life I'd been building, and I'd been inside it the whole time without knowing. When I drove home, Amber was already back. She was in the kitchen making tea, and she said, "Hi. How are you feeling? You sleep okay?" I looked at her for a moment. Normal. Completely normal. She had no idea. I said I was fine. I sat down at the kitchen table. She asked if I wanted tea, and I said no. "Amber," I said. "Yeah." She turned around with her mug. "You left me a voicemail today." She looked at me. A fraction of a second where something moved behind her eyes. "I called you." "I didn't. Not on purpose. Your phone dialed me." 43 seconds. She went very still. "I listened to it," I said. The mug went down on the counter, slowly. Like she was being careful about it. Like making sure it didn't tip was the thing to focus on. "Cole. Is it Brandon?" Silence. "Amber. Is it Brandon Walsh?" I'd remembered his last name from something she'd said months ago, and I don't know why I used it, but I did, and the effect of the full name was like something physical. She flinched slightly, and then tried not to look like she'd flinched. "How long have you been?" "Don't." That word came out harder than I intended. "Just answer the question." "Since February." So quiet. "February." I repeated the word because I needed to hear it again. The month she'd started going to work early. The month the phone went face down. We were engaged in February. I know. I proposed in December, and by February. "Cole, I know. I know." She was starting to cry, which is something I didn't know what to do with because I wasn't feeling sad right then. I was feeling something that had no word I could find for it. A kind of terrible clarity. "Do you love him?" She pressed her hand over her mouth. She shook her head, but the head shake had a quality to it that wasn't convincing. "Amber. I don't. It's not. I don't know what it is." "I know that's not. Are you still planning to marry me?" That question seemed to catch her off guard. Her head came up. "Cole, please don't. I need you to answer it." I wanted to. "I do." "Those are 3 different answers," I said. She looked at me. And then she looked at the floor, and I understood from the looking at the floor that she didn't have one answer, and the not having one answer was the answer. I stood up. I'm a big person, 6'2", and years of the job have kept me in a certain kind of shape. And I try to be conscious of taking up space when I'm upset. I was conscious of it then. I kept my voice level. I picked my jacket off the chair. "I'm going to stay at Reese's tonight." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Can you stay and we can talk about?" "Not tonight." I looked at her. "I need you to think about whether you have a real answer for any of those questions. And I need you to think about it without me in the room." I left. And I've been at Reese's for 10 days and I'm writing this now because I don't know what I'm doing next and I needed somewhere to put it. The wedding is in 3 months. Was in 3 months. I don't know which tense is correct. I said I'd come back. Here I am. To everyone who commented and sent messages, I read all of it. Some of you were incredibly kind. Some of you gave me advice I disagreed with, but that made me think harder about why I disagreed, which is its own kind of useful. One person commented that the 43 seconds detail was going to live in their head, and honestly, same. It's in mine too, and I recorded it. For weeks out. Here's what happened. The wedding is off. I want to say that first and clearly because I know that's what most people are going to want to know. We called the venue 11 days after that Sunday night in the kitchen. We called the caterer the day after that. I contacted the photographer, the florist, the band. Each call was its own small procedure. Explaining without explaining, accepting refunds where available, eating deposits where they weren't. The dress is still in the garment bag in the spare room closet. I don't know what happens to it. That's not mine to figure out. Amber moved out 17 days ago. She's staying with Carla. Yes, the same Carla she was supposedly visiting that Sunday. And no, I don't know if Carla knew what was actually going on, and I've decided not to find out because that information doesn't help me in any direction. She took her things over 2 days. I wasn't there for either of them. Reese drove me to the mountains, and we hiked until I was too tired to think, and then we came back, and it was done. I told my parents. My mother cried, and my father said very little, which is standard for both of them. My dad called me back 2 days later when my mother wasn't on the call and said, "I know you're going to be okay, but I know it doesn't feel that way yet," and both of those things can be true at the same time. And I've thought about that sentence approximately every day since. Amber's family. I was close with her parents, especially her dad, who is a retired schoolteacher and one of the better people I've met. He called me once, about a week in. The call was short. He said he was sorry, that he didn't have words for how sorry he was, that he hoped I knew his feelings about me as a person had nothing to do with what had happened. I thanked him and meant it. I haven't spoken to him since, and I think that's the right call for now. There are casualties of a thing like this beyond just the two people at the center, and sometimes the kindest thing is to let a relationship rest without demanding that it officially end. Mutual friends have done what mutual friends do. Split, gone quiet, picked sides in ways both predictable and surprising. Reese has been what Reese has always been, which is someone who shows up without being asked and doesn't make it weird. My coworkers at the station know something happened and have responded in the particular way that firefighters deal with personal disaster, which involves zero direct acknowledgement and double the practical gestures. My crew captain, a man named Doherty who has been doing this job for 26 years and has seen everything, put his hand on my shoulder at the start of a shift about a week in and said, "You come in and you do the work and you go home and you do it again." And I understood completely what he meant, and that's what I've been doing. The complication nobody predicted, and this one caught me off guard, is Brandon Walsh's situation. Brandon is, it turns out, not some single available person who pursued my fiancée with no consequences of his own. Brandon is engaged. Was engaged. His fiancée, a woman named Priya who I've never met and had never heard of, found out about the affair around the same time I did, apparently through her own route that I don't know the details of. Priya and Brandon's engagement is also now off. I know this because one of Amber's co-workers told Reese, who told me, and I sat with that information for a while. I've thought about reaching out to Priya. To say what, I'm not sure. Maybe just that someone else understands what this particular Tuesday in March felt like. I haven't done it. My attorney. I've consulted briefly, more for the practical aspects of untangling the shared finances than anything else, has gently suggested I not make new connections right now that are rooted in shared pain, and I think she's right. Brandon still works at the clinic. I don't know if that situation is being addressed or not. That's Amber's world, and I've stopped tracking it. The inside of this thing is harder to describe than the logistics. The first morning I woke up at Reese's, I lay there on the air mattress in his living room, and the first thought I had was completely ordinary. Something about a shift schedule, a rotation thing I'd been meaning to sort out. Just a normal work thought. And then the second thought arrived, like it had been waiting politely around a corner, and it was everything. The 43 seconds. The voice on the voicemail. The kitchen. The mug set carefully on the counter. The floor she looked at when she couldn't answer my question. I go through that sequence every morning. It's getting slightly shorter. The gap between waking up and remembering is maybe 4 or 5 seconds now. Early on, it was less than one. I went back to the house for the first time about 2 weeks after she moved out. There were some things I needed that I'd left when I was staying at Reese's. It's still technically my house. The lease is in my name. I walked through the rooms, and the particular quality of the emptiness was strange in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not her absence exactly, more the absence of the version of things I'd thought were real. The spare room where the garment bag still hangs. The kitchen counter where she'd set the mug carefully down. The back porch where I'd proposed, and she'd said yes before I finished the question. There's a playlist she made on the Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen, still there when I turned it on because the speaker just resumes where it left off. I let it play for about 30 seconds before I turned it off. That was enough. I still reach for my phone when something happens at work that I'd normally want to tell her. There's a reflex in me that's been built over 3 years. Good call. Funny thing that happened at the station, something I saw on the drive home. I pick up my phone and the name I want to send it to is still her name, and then I remember. And it's a small impact every time, but it's every time, and the frequency is the thing. I have not listened to the voicemail again. I deleted it about a week in. It felt like keeping a piece of broken glass on the nightstand. I understood why I might want it, but I couldn't figure out what it was actually for. Where I am now, I'm back in the house. Fully moved back in, sleeping in my own bed, which took longer than it should have. Reese's couch is a good couch, but it is not designed for a man who is 6'2" and needs to be functional at 5 in the morning. And at some point, the practicality of the situation overrides the emotional resistance. Amber reached out twice. Once by text, about 2 weeks in, asking if I would talk. I said not yet. The second time was a longer message, written carefully in the way she does things carefully, where she said things that I believe she meant and that I'm not ready to respond to. I've read it several times. I haven't answered it. I'm not interested in reconciliation right now. I want to be precise about that, right now. I'm not making a declaration about forever, because I've learned in the past month that declarations about forever are slippery things. But I am not in a place where I trust the architecture of what we had enough to try to build on it again, and I think that's reasonable, and I'm not apologizing for it. What I'm working on is smaller than that. I'm working on getting through a shift, and coming home, and eating dinner, and doing it again the next day. I'm working on not letting the bad calls from the fall, the ones that made me go quiet, that opened the gap I didn't see Amber stepping into. I'm working on not carrying those the way I was carrying them. I started talking to someone, a therapist at the suggestion of Doherty, who said once that firefighters are very good at running into fire and very bad at processing what they find inside, and that both halves of that sentence are problems. He was right. He's usually right. The engagement ring is in a box in the kitchen drawer. I haven't decided what to do with it. Every few days I think about it and decide I don't have to decide today, and that's fine, and tomorrow I'll decide I don't have to decide then either, and eventually I'll have an answer. That's the best I've got right now. The juniper tree in the backyard is doing what it always does, dropping needles everywhere, smelling like something I don't have a word for in the evening. The neighbor's dog barks at 7 in the morning. The river is 3 blocks away, and sometimes when I wake up at 5:30 and can't go back to sleep, I walk down to it and stand on the path in the dark and watch the water, and it doesn't fix anything, but it's something to do with the feeling, which is sometimes the best you can manage. I proposed in this backyard 3 months ago, and she said yes before I'd finished asking, and I remember thinking that was the most like myself I'd felt in years, and I don't know yet what to do with the fact that I still believe that moment was real, even knowing everything I know now. Tomorrow, a man discovers that a letter delivered to his house by mistake is addressed to his wife's name, and the return address is from a city she swore she'd never been to.